Hereby I open the academic ceremony in which Milan Kovačević will defend the academic thesis Crossing Borders of Employability, the career preparedness of Dutch liberal arts graduates. Dear candidate, may I invite you to present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis.
Dear Prorector, highly esteemed members of the committee, family, friends, and colleagues, in the next 15 minutes, I will present the main points of my dissertation, Crossing Borders of Employability, the career preparedness of Dutch liberal arts graduates. Liberal arts education is a model for general undergraduate studies that is most commonly practiced in the United States. However, over the past 2 decades, this educational model has also become increasingly popular in Europe, especially in the Netherlands, where 10 university colleges have been established. These university college programs have certain distinctive features that make them different from conventional undergraduate programs. First of all, university colleges are general academic programs, meaning that they do not prepare for a specific profession. Secondly, they are interdisciplinary. They have an open curriculum which allows students to freely combine courses across different fields and disciplines and build their self-tailored academic profile. Furthermore, university colleges also feature small-scale, student-centered learning environments, and they are selective programs in the sense that they have a different admission procedure. Conventional programs, on the other hand, are typically more professionally oriented. They have a more fixed curriculum, which is mostly monodisciplinary. Their teaching is usually in larger groups, and they have loose admission requirements. And the main goal of my dissertation was to establish how do these distinctive features influence the career preparedness and labor market outcomes of university college graduates. In other words, to determine whether Dutch university college graduates are well prepared for their future careers. And this was examined by looking at what can broadly be termed as borders of employability, or the different phases and stages that the graduates need to cross as they enter the labor market. This border crossing process corresponds also to the 4 different papers that comprise the dissertation. So the first study is basically already in the bachelor's program, where their journey towards the labor market begins and where they need to learn some important skills that they will later use in their careers. And then when they obtain their bachelor's degrees, university college students typically enroll in a master's program, which faces them with the challenge of specialization, given their broader undergraduate background. And when they finish their master's program, they enter the labor market for the first time. They face employers for the first time. And then the question is whether these weird liberal arts degrees will present some kind of obstacle for them when they enter the labor market, and how employers will perceive these degrees. And finally, not only do they need to obtain employment, they also need to perform well in their jobs. They need to earn competitive salaries, work in jobs that correspond to their level of education, have career development opportunities, and experience job satisfaction. So the first study aimed to assess employability gains of university college students during their undergraduate degree by comparing them to their peers from a conventional bachelor's program in law at the same university. It focused on 6 skills that enhance employability, and these 6 skills were taken from an established employability framework developed by Michael Tomlinson, and these are creativity, lifelong learning, career decidedness, self-efficacy, resilience, and personal initiative. The study used a cross-sectional research design, so it compared the scores in these skills of second-year and third-year cohorts in the 2 programs to see if they score higher than the first years, which would be then interpreted as a sign of development. And data was collected through an online survey with a total of 558 responses. And we can see here that the most interesting results are in creativity and personal initiative, where university college students in the third and the second year scored significantly higher than the first year students. And this growth was not experienced by the students in the other program. So the creativity results can be interpreted as resulting from the interdisciplinary learning environment, which pushes the students to which exposes them to a variety of perspectives and forces them to think across disciplines. Personal initiative results can also be seen as a consequence of the open curriculum, which pushes the students to take initiative, to be proactive, to be in charge of their own educational path. The second study addresses a common critique of liberal arts education, which is that a liberal arts program does not prepare its students well for a specialized master's degree. And this is because the liberal arts curriculum requires the students to take a lot of courses outside of their major, and then they end up having less subject-specific courses than in a normal program. On the other hand, liberal arts proponents would say that this does not present an obstacle because the broad foundation of knowledge and generic skills provided by liberal arts education can compensate for this lack of interdisciplinary depth. And to explore this, the study looked at 3 specialized master's programs at Maastricht University in psychology, neuroscience, and international business. And it compared the 2 groups of students in these programs. So on the one hand, students with a university college degree from University College Maastricht, and on the other hand, students with subject-specific bachelor's degree from a matching program. And it looked at 3 outcomes as measures of academic performance, which were dropout rates, overall GPA, and master's thesis grades. And the result did not show any major differences between the 2 groups. And this indicates that despite having less subject-specific skills and knowledge, liberal arts graduates are well prepared for their master's program. The third study looked at Dutch employers' perceptions of university college graduates. In other words, how do employers perceive liberal arts degrees? So what do they think when they see a liberal arts degree in someone's CV? These programs were initially introduced as an excellence initiative, so maybe this gives them a signal of high prestige and academic excellence, but also these degrees are unusual in the Dutch context. They present an exception, and this is why maybe they are depreciated by employers. This was a qualitative study. I did semi-structured interviews with 20 recruiters from 19 different companies in the Netherlands. And these interviews focused on exploring the graduate selection process for jobs, for early career jobs. So what are the most important factors that recruiters look for when they select early career candidates? How do they infer these skills in the selection process? And what are the different signals sent by a liberal arts degree? And the results show that the signaling effect of a liberal arts degree is largely neutral. So employers mostly are not familiar with liberal arts programs. Only 7 out of 20 interviewed employers actually knew about liberal arts degrees in university colleges. Those who were familiar with liberal arts did not see a university college degree as a sign of distinction, as something that makes a candidate stand out. As one interviewee explained, it's not really a plus, but it's also not really a minus for me. You are not better because you did the liberal arts and sciences. So employers are largely indifferent to these degrees. And also, they tend to assign less significance to the bachelor's degree when a candidate has a master's degree in a matching field, in a relevant field for the job. So overall, they attach less significance to the bachelor's degree in the selection process, especially in less specialized jobs. And finally, the fourth study looked at labor market outcomes of university college graduates. And again, it compared, on the one hand, university college students with a conventional bachelor's degree from a Dutch research university. And the goal of this comparison was to establish whether there are any particular advantages or disadvantages in the labor market stemming from liberal arts degrees. And it compared students who have obtained a master's degree from a Dutch research university. It used data from the Dutch National Alumni Survey. In total, there were 14,933 responses. In 2010, from these were liberal arts graduates. And 8 labor market outcomes were compared. So employment status, time between graduation and first job, career development opportunities, job satisfaction, vertical match, or obtaining a job that corresponds to their level of education, horizontal match, or obtaining a job that corresponds to one's field of study, combinations of these two, and hourly wages. And the results showed that the labor market performance of liberal arts graduates is highly similar to that of their peers. There was only one employment outcome where statistically significant results were found, which is employment status, and more specifically, liberal arts graduates in STEM fields have a probability of being employed that is 13.3 percentage points lower than their peers. So the effect of liberal arts degree on obtaining employment in STEM proved out to be negative, but all other results were found to be statistically insignificant. And also in social fields for employment status, there were no statistically significant results between the two groups. And the results remain consistent across methods, so both using regression analysis, which was the main analytical method, and propensity score matching, which was the robustness check. So overall, the conclusion is that university college graduates are well prepared for the challenges of the labor market, and these degrees have proved to foster skill development in undergraduate studies. They adequately equip their graduates prepare them for specialized master's degree. They also do not present an obstacle when they enter the labor market in terms of employers' perceptions, and they allow them to achieve results that are comparable to their peers in the labor market. So overall, it can be said that this innovative development in Dutch higher education has proven to be successful in terms of labor market repercussions. So university colleges establish themselves as programs that cater to a particular group of students that requires a flexible, self-tailored curriculum, and without compromising their future labor market outcomes. And this concludes my presentation. Thank you for your attention. I give the word back to the pro-rector.
Thank you very much. Before we proceed with the opposition, let me very briefly introduce ourselves to the audience. So on the opposite side, from left to right, we have Professor Dekker, the thesis supervisor. Next to him, Professor van der Velde, the co-supervisor. Then we have Professor van der Wende, Dr. Thompson, and on this side we have, from the far end to this way, Dr. Kolster, Professor Huids, Dr. Kuhn, and online we have a member, Professor Bozard. And my name is Thuisman, I'm the pro-rector for this meeting. The opposition will now be opened by Professor Huids, who's Professor of Positive Health at Work at our School of Economics, of Business and Economics, and he's the chair of the assessment committee. Professor Huids.
Thank you, Pro-Rector. Dear candidate, I'd like to congratulate you with this thesis. I thought it was a very interesting analysis of employability and career preparedness of liberal arts education graduates. And I specifically want to note the use of various research methods. I think that is very well done, how you've combined those in this thesis. And I also really appreciated that the empirical chapters that you've just shown us were preceded by more theoretical and conceptual discussion on employability. So my compliments for that. Of course, there's a few things that I'd like to hear your views on and to reflect on with you. And specifically, that is about chapter 3, where you talk about identity capital. Mm-hmm. And you follow Tomlinson's definition of identity capital as the capacity to develop, an emerging career identity and shape it into a cohesive professional narrative. Now, your text suggests that identity capital is mostly positive for people's careers, right? So it's good to have this strong career identity, this cohesive professional narrative, but I wondered whether that is always really the case with the view of future labor markets. So if you look at what you discuss yourself in chapter 2, you mentioned there that people can expect to have at least 6 different types of jobs in the future. So what does that mean for this idea of identity? So how valuable is that? Can you reflect on that?
Dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your compliments and for your question. So identity capital was chosen in the first study, so in chapter 3, because it represents one of the skills that we found that should be very relevantly developed by liberal arts education, in the sense that we wanted to test the effect of the open curriculum, expecting that, of course, they will start off very undecided, and then the open curriculum gives them the opportunity to explore different dimensions, different courses, and different fields, and then figure out what they want to do later on. So they should end up being more decided about their careers. But what you said is indeed very true about the future of work, where we basically, one of the challenges of contemporary education is how to prepare people for jobs that don't exist yet. And this is also one of the very commonly mentioned arguments of liberal arts education, that these generic skills, broad skills that teach you to think critically, to be flexible, cognitively flexible, are exactly a great preparation for this kind of future where we don't know what kind of job will exist when they graduate. And so this is also something that is called, I believe, the Protean career identity. Named by the Greek god Proteus, who changes shapes. And that's also one of the concepts in the literature that I initially explored and wanted to measure, but gave up on that later on. So the study was more a test of how the open curriculum develops the career decidedness, and to see if it's different than the other program, where actually it turned out that people start with a much higher career decidedness, and then they become less decided over time. Maybe their perception of their profession changes. And the liberal arts, they have a slightly upward trajectory. So that's why it was chosen for this particular study. But indeed, I agree with you that the career identity might be also something that might also be another strength of liberal arts, that it gives you this more flexible career identity. You work in, you have the option to work maybe in a slightly different career or change direction during your career.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned this trend that you've observed, especially at this other program where there's a decrease in this career decidedness. So how worried should we be about that?
Well, the interesting thing is that liberal arts students, they start at a lower point, at a much lower point in the first year than the other program, and they end up approximately at the same point. And the other program is decreasing. But I think that can be interpreted because maybe they're students, maybe they start doubting their choice, maybe their initial perception of the profession was not the same as later what they discovered when they are in the program. But I don't think that it's necessarily a big concern, but I do think that there is an advantage of, that's also one of the advantages that I talk about, the open curriculum, that it gives you the opportunity to change your mind while you are studying without dropping out. Mm-hmm. So, and also like the decidedness, being decided about what you want to do is one dimension, and being able to do different things is also another dimension.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. I'll hand back to you, Pro-Rector.
Thank you very much. Then the opposition will be continued by our online member, Professor Bozard. Professor Bozar is Professor of Learning and Development in Organization at our School of Business and Economics, and he's a member of the Assessment Committee. Professor Bozar.
Thank you, Prorector. Dear candidate, dear Milan, first of all, let me congratulate you with your insightful presentation and well-written dissertation. I'm happy that I can join you today, even though it is online during a moving day. I think your dissertation shows deep insight into the matter as well. It shows your methodological skills, and you have been conducting a wide variety of 4 empirical studies, including both quantitative and qualitative studies. Some of these are already published in ranked journals, showing the recognition of a broader scientific community for the quality of your work. I also believe you show very good insights in the strengths and weaknesses of your 4 studies. However, my job today is to question some of those limitations even more. My question builds further on the question of my colleague Huijts. I want to dig into the concept of employability a bit more. I want to have a question on how you have been conceptualizing employability. Being an educational scientist, I also studied employability in the past, mostly as a multi-dimensional construct consisting of different competences. And a competence refers to knowledge and attitudes and skills. Skills and knowledge and attitudes the student requires to be employable. Examples of such competences are being flexible and having communication skills. You define employability as 6 skills, and building further on Tomlinson, as you just indicated: creativity, lifelong learning, career decidedness, self-efficacy, resilience, and personal initiative. In your conceptualization, you also include variables such as self-efficacy, having the belief you're capable of doing something. Now, motivational theorists would say this is a motivational variable. Having that belief says a lot about your motivation, and they would not see it as a skill. Or similarly, you include the variable lifelong learning, but that variable can include a lot. As an educational scientist, I often see lifelong learning as an activity, as a learning behavior, for example, which can be observed, and thus it's not always a skill. But you do need, for that kind of behavior, you need skills, lifelong learning skills such as reflection or self-directedness, and being able to organize your learning yourself. My question to you is, given these reflections, and given how an educational scientist or a motivational scientist would look at your concept, your conceptualization, can you tell us a bit more about your conceptualization of employability and why you decided to include variables which are more motivation related or more lifelong learning behavior related? Should we go for a broader conceptualization of employability, or is your conceptualization just fine? Or maybe my vision is becoming blurry now. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on these reflections.
Dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you for complimenting my work and also for your question. I think the question very well reflects the debates that are currently in the field of graduate employability studies, which itself is a blurry field, in my opinion, because if you ask 100 different people how do they define employability, they will probably give you all different answers, especially with regards to these different skills or attitudes, motivational factors that are included as factors of employability or constituents of employability. I decided to follow an established framework, which was, like I said, the graduate capital model, because this framework was one of the few that I found to be specifically designed for higher education, and that also was built based on a more prominent framework which basically uses the same elements and which was empirically verified previously. And the choice of the factors that were included in the analysis was based on several criteria, and one of the most important criteria was that these are relevant for liberal arts education. specifically. So something that we would expect from the theory or that liberal arts is good at developing, and to test whether this really is so that was one of the main criteria why these specifically were included in this study, along with other criteria like the ability to measure them with scales and but you are right. So these are not, I mean, I think the biggest question was whether these can, not whether you can see it as more as a scale or more as a motivational component, but whether these are the things that can be developed through higher education. So that was also very important, that they are teachable, that you can expect students to increase their, at least, even if it's not like a hard skill, then increase their awareness of something. And this is also a field that is where debates are happening. So whether things like self-efficacy or resilience is something that can truly be learned in higher education, or this is something that you're born with and you cannot change it. And there is one, I found very convincing evidence to believe that they can be changed. And particularly, there was one paper by Tim Kautz and about skill development and the different interventions that were used for non-cognitive skills. And so I really chose to label these as non-cognitive skills. And I think he's quite extreme, well, maybe extreme in his point of view when he says that character is also a skill. For example, he says character is a skill that can be developed. And he also looks at different interventions for fostering these non-cognitive skills in various phases. So starting from early childhood to elementary school to secondary education, he finds that these non-cognitive skills are more malleable than cognitive skills, that they are more changeable and that they can even be changed at a later age. So that was, for me, quite a convincing evidence that I could also assume that maybe we can expect this to be developed through higher education, through the specific things in liberal arts, like the open curriculum.
Given your research question, you're interested in employability in higher education, but also on the workplace. Should we define employability different then, depending on which phase on this continuum in the career we are looking at?
So I also, in this article, I argue against some existing perspectives of employability, and I want to reframe employability as something that is happening, the skill development that is happening during higher education, because some conceptions of employability kind of confuse it with employment and look at labor market outcomes as indicators of employability, which in my case shouldn't be defined as employability, or maybe we should even abandon the concept employability when we speak about these things and talk about maybe something like career readiness or career decidedness, because the real question for higher education institutions is what is the contribution to their students' development? And then this can be done, I think this can be done if we measure their growth during higher education and not by looking at their later, I mean, of course we should look at their later outcomes, but this then, if you only look at the sort of career results after graduation, then this is also influenced by other things that universities do not influence, like maybe somebody is discriminated in the labor market, maybe there are no jobs in this field in general, so maybe the university program done good work in teaching what they need to teach, but they still end up unemployed, so because there are no jobs in this field or for some other reasons.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then the opposition will be continued by Professor van der Wende, Distinguished Faculty Professor of Higher Education at Utrecht University and a member of the Assessment Committee. Professor van der Wende.
Thank you, Chair. Dear candidate, compliments also from my side. Good piece of research, systematic, broad-based in the research literature, especially compliments of how you navigated the skills literature, which is a bit of a conceptual swamp. So bravo there. So don't worry, but we do need to have a conversation because what I was thinking, it's good research, but are we convinced? And is it enough? Not for your degree or the value of the research, but for the value of liberal arts and sciences in this context. Because the sense I got from reading your thesis is, well, it doesn't hurt, right? It's not a bad thing necessarily, which is of course quite a, and indeed you confirmed that in your proposition 3. It's not an obstacle. I read them only this morning. Mm-hmm. I said, okay. That's one thing. So what I would like to discuss with you is to try to see it through. What are we looking at? And the question then is twofold. What really makes the difference, if any? And I appreciate you had to struggle with little variation on both dependent, independent variables, so attribution isn't simple. And you already said that, the personal traits, I would say, or characteristic-related aspects, if they come out, it's always difficult to see whether they really come from an education or from a prior education or from class background, etc. Appreciate that. So what really is it that makes the difference? And a little anecdote. I worked at Harvard as a researcher, but the faculty, the teaching faculty, then had a very severe discussion on the curriculum. And liberal arts is the Harvard College basis. And they said the actual development takes place in the houses. The curriculum doesn't matter. That was, of course, a quite extreme position. The experience takes place in the houses. And the houses in Harvard is a very specific context in which it's all about this personal development, social context, etc. Would you go as far as to share this, that it's about the experience, and in line with your proposition 2, so you may like to defend that one, because actually you're saying that there in a way. It's not in the classes where the learning takes place. Would you go as far as to say the curriculum matters less than the social experience of a university college?
Dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your compliments and thank you for your question. So I'm looking now at proposition 2. I think maybe the quote was not referring to classes as inside the classroom, but through like one course or something like that. So I think the argument here is that employability is something that is equivalent with good learning. So and not something that you can just make students to take one module or one additional extracurricular activity and then consider that you have taken care of their employability. So I think this was the meaning of the quote. But I agree with you when you say that the academic environment, the academic environment matters also a lot, and the things that are happening outside of the classroom with students interacting with each other. And this is also one important feature of liberal arts education. So the close academic environment, which you do not find in a conventional program. And given the nature of the research, this was indeed something that was not in the focus of the research. These outside activities, and also something like social capital that develops over there. And this is one of the the things that were not in the focus of the research. And so you ask the question, what really makes the difference? But I think that the study, the dissertation largely showed that in terms of labor market prospect, that there are no differences. So if the difference maybe is that this is not showing yet in the labor market. Maybe it's showing in some other aspects that were not assessed, like something related to social development or social consciousness of students. But for the labor market outcomes, these results were mostly similar to the other group of conventional bachelor students. So I think the conclusion was that it doesn't hurt, but it also doesn't provide an advantage in the labor, at least when it comes to the labor market. So, and it is very difficult, as you said, in educational research to sort of separate all the influences and isolate all the things that could influence one's outcome. There are things outside of education that also influence one's labor market prospect. There are also other levels of education. So this is just one bachelor's degree. There's also previous schooling. There's the master's degree. So this was something that is also a limitation of educational research in general to try to sort of account for all of these factors, which can sometimes be challenging. And also, one more thing about the extracurricular activities and the comparison with Harvard is that, at least in my experience from this research, is that the Dutch context is very different with regards to this, because the notion of a prestigious college is something that is more rooted in the American culture, and these university colleges in the Netherlands are very closely integrated into research universities, and these are generally perceived as very even. So there's not a strict hierarchy in this sense. So this is not, especially with regards to labor market signaling, this is not recognized by employers, whether you are in this kind of institution.
Okay, thank you very much. Then the opposition will be continued by Dr. Thompson. Dr. Thompson is an associate professor and director of bachelor programs at our School of Business and Economics.
Thank you. Dear candidate, I would also like to congratulate you on a very interesting thesis. I very much enjoyed it, and I would like to mention that I will use many of your findings. They will have direct implications for the way that we think about shaping our educational programs, even in a mostly non-liberal arts environments where there are still people that are sympathetic to introducing elements of liberal arts education into our programs. So great work and very interesting. The other opponents have mentioned here, there are still things to sort out, to be discussed, and I have two related questions, primarily about Chapter 6, or about Chapter 6. It is interesting and reassuring to read that in most cases and in most areas, liberal arts graduates do well and they perform well in the job market. However, the STEM being an exception also does worry me. It worries me perhaps even more in the context of the rise of artificial intelligence. The rise of artificial intelligence could very well go either way for liberal arts graduates. It could be the case that, say, some of these effects that are pointed to by David Otter, the capacity for or the adaptability, flexibility, tacit knowledge, etc., that tend to be, at least I think of them as being strong in the liberal arts environment, and you also point to that, could play out very positively for these graduates. But it could also very well be the case that the vast majority of jobs require some STEM component, some STEM-like skills and capabilities, in which case I would say your findings worry me more. So based on your work, but perhaps also reflecting a bit beyond your work, how well positioned do you think liberal arts graduates are for the development that is taking place now and will be even more rapid over the coming decades? And do you have thoughts on potential changes to the liberal arts environment and the university colleges in the Netherlands as a consequence of this?
Dear esteemed opponent, thank you for your compliments and for your question. I agree that the results in STEM, that they are a concern for liberal arts. And the thing is that based on these findings from our research, it was difficult to say whether these lower employment rates in STEM of liberal arts reflect the perception of employers, the preference for employers with people for subject-specific bachelor's degrees, or does it reflect really a skill deficiency in these areas of liberal arts? Because if we see that those who do enter STEM, then they have exactly matching labor market outcomes. So if we only look at those who do obtain employment, then they earn, for example, same wages, they do not have vertical mismatch. So that shows that those who do make it into STEM, then they have no problems in their careers. But those who do not make it, then what is the reason for them not being employed? Based from the study about employers' perception, I think it's very much a signaling problem. So employers said, for example, the interviews did not mainly focus on highly specialized jobs, but some of the employers that I interviewed, the recruiters, were also hiring for these kind of more specialized positions. And then I asked them what do they think when they have to choose, for example, between a liberal arts bachelor and someone who has a matching, like subject-specific, more technical or more specialized bachelor, and everything else is the same. They have the same master's degree, and then they would usually say that they would prefer, if they really have to make a choice, that they would probably make that choice on some other factor than just a degree. But overall, they would prefer to have someone who has a bachelor that gives them more confidence that they really have mastered all of these specific hard skills. So this shows that they also have a little bit of doubt whether this liberal arts program, which is more broad, really gives you that fundamental, that this foundation of hard skills, so that is not a risk for them to make this kind of hire. So I think liberal arts programs should consider this both in terms of trying to make the liberal arts model more visible to employers, to explain to them the philosophy of liberal arts, to maybe attend some career fairs or have contacts with organizations, or make some kind of agreement with them for internships with students or different collaborations, so that they are more familiar with the liberal arts models, so they do not discriminate against liberal arts degree holders when they are hiring. But also, given the future of work and the relevance of these fields, and in the future, I'm sure that the liberal arts programs will also respond to this, and that they will integrate maybe more STEM-related material in the curriculum, and more opportunities for students who are interested in STEM to develop more of these skills already in the undergraduate program. I think most of liberal arts programs now are still more, although they do have a natural science component in all liberal arts programs, that they still attract more students whose interests are in humanities and social sciences.
Very good. Thank you very much. I think it's a good answer and very informative. Let me ask a very quick follow-up on this, and the answer could be yes or no, depending on what is in the data. My anecdotal experience from talking to students, colleagues, and also employers about ideas to introduce liberal arts elements in our non-liberal arts programs have been that the perception of employers, the signaling aspect that you allude to, varies quite a bit across countries. not only across, let's say, US versus Europe, where there are extreme differences. Amherst College graduates in philosophy regularly get jobs in Goldman Sachs, which would not happen, or would rarely happen in Europe. But even within Europe, you see real differences where in some countries employers look much more closely for narrow skills. Do you have anything in your data? It's not included in the regressions that you show us, but is there anything in your data or in work that you have done that could speak to this?
No, because my research only focused on the Netherlands. So it would have been interesting. It would have been interesting to explore this, but the research was only for the Dutch context. But I can imagine that because liberal arts are in the Netherlands, they are more people know about liberal arts. There are more of these programs in the Netherlands than other European countries. So if you would go, for example, I was in Slovakia for my secondment, and I think there is a small liberal arts college in Bratislava, and I think that employers in Eastern Europe they do not know at all what liberal arts is, even more than here. It's relatively well established and they still are not familiar. But for example, I am also from Eastern Europe, and we do not even have a word in the language that describes liberal arts education. So if you say liberal arts, if you translate that literally, then people would have no clue what it means. I didn't know for the term of liberal arts education until later on. I realized that this is actually called liberal arts.
Thank you very much. The opposition will now be continued by Dr. Kolster, who is an assistant professor on higher education at Twente University.
Thank you, Pro-Rector. Dear candidate, it was a pleasure to read your dissertation. It's very commendable that you have looked at the topic of liberal arts education and its connection to the labor market from multiple angles, right? Not only considering what they've learned, also the effects on their later studies, and of course on the labor market. But of course, as always, there are the results that leave some room for reflection and discussion. And I would like to very much pick up on the discussion where the previous opponents left their questions as well. So in your dissertation, in several places you mentioned remarks by the on liberal arts education and university colleges by the former Minister of Education, Professor Plasterk. In one of them, he compares liberal arts education as representing a Disney amusement park. And I thought this was very interesting. And I was trying to think about if I could see some comparison, and maybe I don't see the comparison directly with the liberal arts, but there are some comparisons with the university. Right? Because with the ticket or a high school diploma or entrance exam, students can enter the university. With a ticket, they can enter the park. And then they can, for example, study physics at the twilight zone of terror. They can focus on the theater performance, so study arts, focus on the parades and see people dressed up, today as well. Perhaps they can study the religious elements in Star Wars land, or wonder about the complexity of the organizational aspects of running the parks, of social sciences, or indeed they can do a little bit of everything, so liberal arts education. Now, for this, the interest is, irrespective of what they've done that day, is that they had a nice experience, perhaps life-changing experience. But that's not something that we, as a university, look at in their education, or in education as it seems. But looking at the outcomes of your study, right, where there seems to be little gains in the skills that you've studied, and employers, they do not really recognize the skills that we thought that university would develop. So perhaps we should also look at education in a similar way. So not only focus on the knowledge and skills, but also look at the experience and the impact it has on the graduate identity, because that seems to be what the employers are interested in this personal narrative that education has created. And I would like to hear your reflections on this notion. So when assessing and conceptualizing employability and its outcomes of higher education, should we give less attention to knowledge and skills, but rather study education as an experience good and how it relates to the personal development and personal narrative. What are your thoughts?
Dear esteemed opponent, thank you for complimenting my work and for the question. I think the remark that Plasterk made about the educational amusement park, or I think he even said educational Disneyland or something. Yeah, I think he was trying to, he was arguing that liberal arts is not a serious program. But for your question, I still think that higher education should focus more on skills, and especially that there should be even more measurements, more initiatives to introduce some kind of, maybe even something like a PISA test for universities, to see how the students are developing these important skills in higher education. And the experience is important, but it's important that the students are happy with their education, but sometimes that also means that they will be happy if they have to do less work and not. So I think that we should be still more strict and focus on the skill development, and also that, well, all of these university rankings that now exist, that they focus mostly on research, that we should also incorporate some kind of skill development assessment that can also speak to that, to see whether they develop relevant skills in higher education.
Thank you. A quick follow-up. So would you argue then that the concept of employability doesn't need further development to integrate one of the findings, I think, in chapter 5, where employees focus on this personal narrative more so than the skills? So do you think that is not relevant for the further development of the conceptualization of employability?
Yes, that is a good question. I think it's relevant, and employers also focus very much on. So it's important to get hired. It's important to be able to build a professional narrative to convince employers about that. So, but the question is, I think there is a sort of this balance between what the higher education system is doing and what employers are looking for, because higher education does not mostly there are also some kind of workshops for career preparation, but the curriculum itself, it's not focused on these things like how to present yourself to employers. They are more focused on the skill development. It's a complex question. I think also employers my research has shown also that employers do not really value things like your GPA. They look more for experiences, working experiences during studies, or even memberships in some kind of student organization. So this is also a question how universities should approach this. Should they give students more business-like experiences or integrate them in the curriculum? Or so maybe that's the question that should be answered through a dialogue with employers and universities.
Thank you very much. Then the opposition will now be continued by Dr. Kuhn, who is an associate professor on lifelong learning at our School of Business and Economics. And she's the secretary of the degree committee.
Thank you, Pro-Rector. Dear candidate, dear Milan, I also would like to congratulate you first with your thesis. You have written a very interesting, a very relevant thesis, and I think also as a developer of education, I can really make use of some of your findings. As said before, I also like the multiple angles that you have chosen to analyze the topic as a whole. I read your thesis with a lot of pleasure, and it also raised some questions. And the question I would like to ask you is related to chapter 3, in which you estimate whether employability skills of liberal arts education students differs or differently increase during education than that of law students. And that is actually only holding under the assumption that you mention in the chapter that characteristics of the year cohorts do not change over time. And I think you do a great job in acknowledging this and also in including several important control variables. However, I think you might miss one aspect of this assumption. The way teaching affects students over the cohorts should actually also be equal between UCM and law students. And I would like to ask you to comment on the likelihood of this assumption to hold, especially in COVID times, since you were measuring you did your data collection in 2021.
Dear esteemed opponent, thank you for your compliments and for the question. So if I understood correctly, you are asking, you're doubting the assumption that the year cohorts do not change over time in both programs.
So it's not necessarily about the characteristics of the cohorts, but about the way that teaching affects the skill development. So how likely is it that this common trend is similar between UCM and law students?
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed, the study took place during the second wave of COVID, when we were having on and off, online, hybrid, normal classes changing all the time. However, I do not think that this influenced the difference, because I think it was the same university and the experience was the same in both programs, because the policies for COVID, so how much online classes you have, how much on-site, and so that was changing consistently throughout the university. So it was in the same way in both programs.
I agree to that, but I think given your, I think chapter 2, in which you describe the differences between, for example, UCM and law education, you also mention, and you just mentioned it before in your presentation as well, that there is a close academic environment at UCM. You have the consultancy, you have even smaller skilled education, more contact hours. So don't you think that this characteristics of the teaching, that COVID affects UCM in a different way than it does to law education? And what would then be the effect of this for your assumption and for your results?
I think you are right that this could have played a role, but I think that the main two effects that the study focused on were the open curriculum and the interdisciplinarity of liberal arts. And those two were not affected by COVID. The academic community probably was affected by COVID, but then that might also mean that the groups are even more comparable in these terms, because if you take out the interactions, then they both do not have the social interactions that are having. So maybe that could even help isolate the effect of the curriculum more and the interdisciplinary learning. But indeed, this is a possible limitation of the study also. But it was inevitable, because it was very difficult to in any way control for it, because COVID was quite chaotic, and some students started during COVID, others had it in the middle of their studies. So, and I can imagine that also is different but I was hoping that the fact that it happened at the same university and that the policies were the same, that would guarantee consistency, and that this could be taken, that this should not be a concern for the results of the research. But also, this was only more of an exploratory study, so just to dig the surface to see whether these skills are developed differently. I think it would be very nice to have a follow-up in normal conditions now, and maybe incorporate even more assessments of cognitive skills that can be objectively measured. So sort of like problem solving, critical thinking, maybe something along those lines, and to have a bigger group of students where we could maybe do a follow-up and to see whether this initial study really how do these results, whether there is something else there.
Yeah. I like your idea about following up in a different context, maybe. What I would like to ask you is...
Milan Kovačević, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense. I request that you and your company await the results of our deliberations and our return to this room.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Can you get to what?
I know what's on the line. I know you know that I can't read your mind. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer. East side to the west side, no place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Traveling so far from gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future than we go for. And even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. I know you won the battle once you grow. Southside, 7 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer. East side to the west side, no place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer. East side to the west side, no place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile.
Are we supposed to stand there? Are we still holding this?
Uzmi. Moraš da držiš. A ne znam, ne.
Milan Kovačević, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor Dekker is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor to now take the floor.
Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times? To be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
Yes, I promise.
Then, by the authority vested in us by law, and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Milan Kovačević, the degree of doctor, and grant you thereby all rights and privileges attached by custom and law. And as evidence of this, I now present you with the degree certificate, signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee present today, and affixed with the official seal of the university.
I can put it here.
Dear Milan, congratulations on your doctorate. We've all been able to see the quality of the research you have produced. It is evident in the lovely thesis that you have written, how you have defended it here today, and in the articles you have published and that have flown into journals. However, as you have shown, as my co-promoter once observed, it's a skills world out there, and it's how we work that is the key to success in the modern labor market. And as supervisors, Rolf and I have observed the many, well, competencies, knowledge, attitude, and skills that you have deployed in creating this research. And while you are yourself not a liberal arts and sciences graduate, I think you have displayed many of the, well, graduate attributes, if I can use that phrase, that we would hope for in a liberal arts and sciences student. For one thing, you have displayed enormous amounts of grit, the ability to keep going even in the face of difficulty. And, well, as anybody who does empirical research knows, there's a lot of hard graft involved, and certainly when you're doing empirical studies. I mean, okay, we want some data from master's programs, GDPR, AVG, ethics committee, who talks to who, person to person to person to person to person, and yet you persevered. Getting 558 students to fill out employability surveys in the middle of a pandemic, well, it requires email after email after email, handing out copious amounts of cookies, charming yourself into people's agendas, standing with sandwich boards if it is required. You gotta do what you gotta do. And recruiters, well, they don't always answer their emails either. And that the fact that we have 4 studies here, all with their own data, it shows that you have that sense of grit. Come hell or high water, no matter what happened, you mechanically kept going without so much as a blip. And this quality of grit is something that I think will serve you well in your future career. Secondly, in the modern world, you have to take initiative in developing your skills, teaching yourself new things, learning new techniques, and seeking out assistance to master new methods. Because if you do what you always have been doing, well, you'll never go out of your comfort zone, and you will be limited as a result. And this too you have done. You've taught yourself from nothing new statistical methods, and quite advanced ones. But not only that, you also taught yourself qualitative methods, ethnographic interviewing, simply because you came to the conclusion that, hey, I need this to answer the question I have. And so you have demonstrated a sense of ownership of your skills that shows the ability to self-start, and that, as you know, will be so important. And a third thing that I wanted to remark on is the love of language. In this age of artificial intelligence and ChatGPT and bad English as the universal language, it is all so easy to take the craft of writing for granted. And yet writing is an art. The shades of words, the rhythm of sentences, the dance of the punctuation marks, you might not see them, but you perceive them, as they enable you to transparently communicate meaning. And in every draft of every document, that desire to get the sentence just right, that desire to have the perfectly formed paragraph, it came through, because in everything you did, you wanted to get it just right. And sweating the details and caring about the details is the only way to make something really awesome. And that you've done. I should also thank you on behalf of not only myself, but everybody in the liberal arts movement and every student of liberal arts, because we've been doing this for about 25 years now. And you keep getting the question, well, it sounds really interesting, sounds really nice, but can you actually get a job with this? Surely not. And this is a question that we continue to face at open days, that, well, graduates of liberal arts programs and students report having to discuss at Christmas with, annoying uncles and aunts who just cannot believe that you could actually get a job with this kind of education. And so on behalf of them, thank you so much, because we can now shove this book up there and rab it on their faces to demonstrate that, no, actually, as we like to say at UCM, also on employability, things will be okay. And for that, we owe you a huge debt of gratitude. Dear Milan, we do not know where the future will take you, and yet as I reflect on the skills and competencies that you've developed and displayed in this process, I'm certain that you will continue to do excellent work and do it excellently, and that these qualities will always be recognized. Rolf and I, we don't think we could have wished for a better PhD student, and that's why I was a little bit surprised by your final proposition, in which you bring in Cervantes. Perhaps somebody with a better plectrum will come along. Somehow I think it will be a while. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Dear Dr. Kovačević, also on behalf of Maastricht University, I congratulate you with the doctorate degree that you have just acquired. Now, before I close this meeting, I would like to thank all members of the degree committee, and especially those coming from far and those online. Your participation is all much appreciated. And before we close the internet connection, and while you're still standing at your microphone, let me briefly offer our online member the option to congratulate our candidate.
Dr. Milan, congratulations. Great achievement. Enjoy this great achievement. Make sure that you celebrate. I was very happy to get to know you and your work, and I'm sure it will have a big impact on our university community. So thank you for that. Congrats.
We will now use the opportunity to take some pictures with the candidate and the full degree committee, including the online person. And after that, we will all move to the rafter elsewhere in this building, where you can all congratulate the new doctor. Thank you all very much for your attendance. I now close this academic meeting.